Hey everybody, Andrew Marston here with another episode of the Community Spotlight interview series that I'm doing where we get to know active members of the Square a little bit better. And today we have the privilege to be joined with 531 himself, Liam Clisham. Liam, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. I think you were the first person in the School of Motion alumni group that I ever had a real time conversation with. At the time, I was charging something ridiculously low, like 35 an hour or maybe 40 an hour, and you were the one who said you should be charging more than that. And it was very eye opening.
Yeah, we were talking about like how to raise your rates or like finding new clients beyond that person. And yeah, I had a lot of those conversations at the beginning of the year. I think I put that, I guess, call to action out. I don't know what to call it, but
Yeah.
I think I did close to like 80 calls with people or something. It got really intense for a while.
Well, so what prompted that, and where does that come from? Because not everybody just starts dropping 80 calls with community members, you know.
Yeah. Um, I guess I know I'm totally throwing off your format for this thing.
Oh, it's
But yeah,
totally
I
fine.
guess I guess it basically came from one, I had so much success with people helping me in my career that I've always felt it's a good idea to give back and pass it on. Two, the pandemic had been going on for a bit at that point, I think, right? Uh, yeah, because we chatted at the beginning of this year. It's all blurring
uh
together.
it was either beginning of this year or end of 2020. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I think the pandemic had been going on for about a year when I put it out, and I had a really successful year and overloaded with work. And so part of it was selfish, where I wanted to find people I could pass off work to. Part of it was giving back and answering questions. A little bit of inspiration from Ryan Summers because he's been doing it for a while too. So kind of a mixing pot of that.
Yeah, because I think you posted like that your goal was to give out a bunch of work last year. I'm just curious because now it's been pretty much the whole year. How did that go? Were you able to?
Yeah, I it didn't go exactly how I thought it would, but it also went better than I thought it would too in certain ways. Where my goal was to like help 100 freelancers or 100 people get jobs. I think that was the goal, and that definitely didn't happen because I kept getting booked on jobs. And we can probably get into my background a little bit, but like I really specialize in like a lot of Houdini 3D work now. So the jobs I kept getting booked for were specialty jobs that I couldn't really pass off as much as I had been hoping for. Where previous years I'd get asked for a 2D job that I just didn't want to do because I wasn't going in that direction anymore. And so I would hire someone either through my company or just pass the job off. So I was like, all right, 2020 was so busy with so many jobs coming in like that. I bet next year I can hand off like 100 gigs to people. Um, but it just didn't work out that way because I kept getting booked for these very specialty niche jobs.
Well, I mean, the intention was there, and you connected with a lot of people, and who knows where that will lead in the future. But
Yeah.
like, let's, yeah, let me. I was the one who kind of like started us down this train, but let me just like back way up because people I feel like who maybe aren't familiar with you, they're like, wait, who's this guy? What does he do? So, yeah, I guess first off, where can people find your work online? This will give me a chance to like put some of your work on the screen.
It's a little bit of a mixed bag right now. So I guess in short, people can find me for the time being at 531. That's what I've been going under and what my freelance slash co-op studio
Yeah,
is a
yeah.
little bit where like I was in this weird place of being a freelancer and um, I guess a studio at the same time and outsourcing to people. So I was mostly going under 531. But yeah, I'm I've moved over to my personal site, 531.com. But I have recently left freelance to go full time for a company called Recur.
Ooh,
And I'm
congratulations.
starting, thanks. So I'm slowly changing over all of this to Liam Clisham again and kind of dropping 531. Oh, this is for later for
Oh,
like show and
perfect.
tell.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you like Instagram, either I have an underscore for a lot of things because 531 was already taken. But if you just do a search for 531 or Liam Clisham, you'll find my content. I'm all over the place.
Yeah, I want to get to the. It's kind of like the tail end of the story, but the most recent part of you switching from your freelance studio to full time. But I feel like we need some backstory first. um,
Yeah.
so could you start out first, maybe like concisely who you are, what you do right now, and then let's jump back and get your backstory. Like, how do we get to this point?
Yeah. Um, so currently, I'm a senior motion designer for Recur and trying to choose my words wisely. We are basically specializing in digital collectibles, also known as NFTs, but also collectible experiences is the other way we're calling it. I don't think I'm giving away too much information, but Recur has now partnered with Viacom, CBS, Paramount for the foreseeable future,
Hmm.
making digital experiences and collectibles for their properties. So
Hmm.
if you can think of it, they're trying to do releases like that. And just this past week, Disney announced something similar that they're going to be doing collectibles too. And that kind of just seems to be the future right now for as good or bad as you think the NFT scene is. I don't think it's going anywhere. So that's where I'm at now.
And you said you do mostly 3D Houdini.
Yeah.
That's your main gig.
Yeah. So do you want me to jump into like my background starting out, or should I just because
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
because
Let's. You're right. Let's just go. I because I know a little bit about your background. I think I'm just skipping ahead in my mind. So you were born, and as soon as you were born, you were a 3D specialist motion designer, right? Just
as
straight
soon
out
as
of.
I was born.
That's what I
Yeah.
thought. That's what I thought. No,
Um,
what led you
yeah.
to this place? Let's start like, if you don't mind, maybe like all the way back in high school, maybe.
Yeah. So I guess even before high school, like I
Yeah.
really loved to draw as a kid and kind of fell out of it in like middle school, early high school. And I don't know if that's just because of like clickiness and like art not being like what the cool kids were doing. Also, like thinking about my future, like I can't really be an artist if I'm gonna try and have a livable income, which is totally not true. I've come to find out. But yeah, I guess when I was in my sophomore, junior year in high school, I was this is to age myself around 2002 ish. So I was very fortunate. I was living in New Hampshire at the time, and I was very fortunate to go to this high school that had a like pretty outstanding tech wing where they realize like, okay, not everyone wants to work on cars anymore. So they took out like this garage and rebuilt it as like a design studio, but like a CAD studio as well, and things like that. A buddy of mine had been taking a graphic design course, and I was like, what is that? That sounds really cool. So I signed up the following semester after learning about it. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. Like I can actually do art and maybe make a living at it. And the way the school was set up is by the time I was graduating, I essentially had an associate's degree in graphic design and could transfer
Wow.
into like any college to go to graphic design, basically. Yeah.
Awesome. So
Um,
you're set to do graphic design right out of high school then.
I was going to pursue graphic design, not to get like dark, but as I was graduating, my father passed away earlier that year in 2004, and not like anything sad. He was just old when he had me. He was like in his 70s, so like it was time.
Mm-hmm.
But that of course threw me off as like a 17, 18-year old. So I took 18 months off, kind of worked retail. I was freelancing for this woman um, who had a small design studio in this small town in New Hampshire. She was just passing me like put a logo on this banner type thing and like cut out this person for me, like really small stuff. But it kind of like got me introduced into it. And I was like, all right, this is cool. Um, so I finally enrolled in college for graphic design, and it was just not for me. Like the college scene, I was just not mature enough for it, and like I really liked going to drawing classes and art classes, but outside of that, I was not going to my public speaking classes, like
Oh,
my
right,
stats
right,
class. And
right.
eventually, after a couple of semesters, dropped out and worked retail for about 3 years as a store manager for GameStop. So like basically the the long and the short of this story of my life is you never know where your career is going to go and like the ups and downs that it has. Um, so I guess this was around 2008, 2009. I kind of had like a revelation that if I continued to live in New Hampshire working retail, I was not going to do anything I wanted to do with graphic design or my life. So I had some family members that offered to let me move back to Maryland, where I was originally born, and stay with them so I could complete my degree. So I moved down here and I started working at what's called a flexographic press. And that's a huge word just to say they make labels for things. It's like an offset press, but specifically designed for label making. So if you pick up a prescription bottle from like CVS or something, those labels
Oh,
on there,
yep,
I
yep.
was designing those.
Uh-huh.
So, not the most fanciest gig, but still working in design and getting into it. I was at community college. So, for those listening and just getting started, I think community college is like the best thing ever because it really like slowly introduced me into the world without being too expensive and kind of like what School of Motion's doing. Like, you can taper yourself into getting into this career a little bit without taking on too much debt. Um, I really excelled there and then eventually applied to Towson University, which is here in Maryland, got in, and just to like throw some more craziness in my life, my mom had passed away. My
Oh,
At that
jeez.
point too, my wife had become pregnant with our first. Um, so like I'm not saying this for people to feel bad, but like as inspiration of like if you have grit, like you can make it in motion design.
Yeah,
Um,
that is an intense time.
yeah.
And you're going
So
to school.
yeah, I was going to school.
Wow.
Um, and while I was at school, I had this awesome advisor, and she kept pushing me to try different classes. And one of them, her husband was teaching, was motion design. And I was like, that just sounds stupid. Like I want to be an awesome like logo designer and work for like Polisher and do stuff like that, or like Jessica Hish. And at the first night of the course, I was like sitting there and just like arms crossed, totally not wanting to be there because it was like a 4 hour lecture series. And he started showing stuff on the screen. And my professor, his name was Mike Ring, who actually ended up hiring me after that class to work as a junior with him. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like I can I can take my designs and like they're not being thrown in the trash afterwards after a festival or whatever. They actually like come to life, and I was hooked. And um so after that point I basically catered my entire career to being a motion designer. I started going towards internships that were motion design. I was trying to find small shops in the area that I could like do logo animations for, just like practice. And um, after that, I graduated in 2014. So like, took me about 10 years to actually get through college and graduate and become a motion designer.
But do you
Um,
feel like, sorry to cut you off, but
yeah,
like, do you feel like you're glad you waited to get your degree until like not like your the typical 18 to 22 age range? Do you feel like you got more out of it?
yeah, um, totally. I think like one, just like the burden of the expense on me
Yeah.
pushed me to want to try harder, but two, having worked retail for so long and like service industry jobs really like gives you an understanding of like how precious it is that we get to do what we do too. And
Yeah.
like like the money is good for motion design, but like when you compare it to service industry jobs, it's like it's really good. And so like so like for me, I was really invested in getting as much as I could out of it, making connections with either students, teachers that knew other people in the industry, which I was going to talk about with Mike Ring. So that was my first job out of college. He was my professor, but he hired me at this little studio called the Garden Creative, and basically gave me my first opportunity even into like a real full-time job, where I ended up having a second kid during this time. Need a full-time job because I was working there part-time.
Yeah.
And Mike had been working at Discovery Channel, which is down in DC area, or was
Mm.
down in the DC area. And he's like, hey, like I can't bring you on full-time, but I can at least get you in the door at Discovery. And so, yeah, I'd started working at Discovery in about 2015 and was there until 2016.
Are you doing 2D or 3D at this point?
Oh, yeah. So this is
You've been
like,
3D the whole
yeah,
time?
no. This is all 2D. So
Okay.
I initially started off basically transitioning my graphic design skills, which were mostly 2D, into After Effects and, like typical explainer type stuff. And I picked up 3D a little bit while I was at the garden, just because this other guy, Scott, had been messing with it. I was like, oh, that's really cool. I've never seen Cinema 4D before. I'll play with the demo a little bit. But then when I got to Discovery, the only person that knew 3D on the team was my creative director. And he was like, hey, do you know anything about cinema? I was like, I know a little bit, but I'm willing to learn if it's going to like help me get on some more cool projects. So then I started doing as much as I could in cinema and fell in love with that, and kind of just followed the way the industry was going back and forth a little bit. We're like, okay, clients are asking for 2D, so I'm going to focus on 2D now for a bit. Clients are now asking for 3D, so I'm going to focus on that. Um, so yeah, I've kind of gone back and forth until I'd say about 3 years ago, and I was just like, nope, I'm going to be a 3D specialist.
What happened when you sort of drew that line in the sand? Like, I'm thinking with your clients and your work, because it's a
Yeah,
scary thing. At least for me, thinking about specializing to that degree is intimidating.
yeah. So I mean, in 2016, that's when I went freelance because my contract was up with Discovery, and at first I mostly focused on 2D work for freelance just because I felt comfortable with that and pricing with that. Um, but then as got into like year two, three, I kept getting asked for more and more 3D stuff. And really, what kind of made me draw the line in the sand was just the differentiation and pricing a bit too,
Yeah.
um, which I don't want to push people to get into 3D because you'll get paid more, because I thoroughly enjoy it more. But also gigs are, I find, are a little bit longer too, so you end up getting paid more because there's more time and involvement with it. Where like 2D jobs, I might be booked for 2 weeks, have a week off, book for 2 weeks. 3D jobs, I was often getting booked for like 3 months
Yeah.
straight. So
Jeez.
that's kind of the toss up of like why there's a little bit more money there is there's longer bookings I was finding. Um, but also, as far as like quality of clients, seemed to really go up when I had decided what path I wanted to go on. Because there was a little bit of like, are you sure you can do this? Because like we see a lot of 2D work. Or are you sure that you can do this because we see a lot of 3D work and this is a 2D project? So um, I know Ryan has talked about how great being a generalist is, and I think that's really key to be able to touch on a lot of things and like have an understanding of those things. But if you can specialize in something, uh, I I think it really shows in your work and your passion, and you start getting hired for those things, and you can start raising your rates quite a
Hmm.
bit, 2D or 3D.
And I still remember where we are in the story. But I just because it comes up a lot on the square, you seem to answer similar questions and get tagged for similar questions. Um, the two things that come to mind for you are like how much do you charge for a 1 minute explainer video with one character, and you have this like kind of set range that you just quote. What do you remember? Like what would you
Yeah.
generally quote for something like that?
Yeah. So, in my experience for an entire video, and what I mean by that is you're concepting, you're working with a copywriter, whether or not they have one on their team internally or you're hiring one out, um, you know, style frame, storyboard, animatic, everything is to me a baseline 1 minute is $10,000. Like it
With a
fluctuates a little
character?
bit.
Did you say? I'm sorry. Did you say with
I
a character?
I I generally don't do much character work. So like that for me is without a character, and I might roll it back to like 8K if it's more of like, hey, we just want some icons like floating around and
Yeah.
oscillating a little bit. Um, but when you start to break it down time wise, and if you're using a day rate, you start to see like how much time goes into these little sections here and why it's important to charge $10,000 at a minimum, at least to me,
Mhm.
especially if you start to outsource to someone. So if you're outsourcing to an illustrator to come up with storyboards or the designs, and they're charging $500 a day, that instantly is what $2,500 for a week worth of their times.
Yeah.
So, that 10K can go really fast. And then I'd say with character work, I start to push it up towards like 15,000 per minute, and then 3D, so on and so forth. So,
Mm.
yeah, if anyone's looking, you'll see that I often recommend $10,000 as a baseline.
Yeah, and I guess because I saw you post about this pretty often, or these questions come up often enough that it makes me think of you. That I just wanted to one more time give you a chance to get that out there. And the other thing is project files. You just
Oh yeah,
what's your philosophy on project files?
I've come a long way with that. I used to, and I think it's kind of the way of the loud minority on, on Twitter and Slack and stuff. Be like, no, you don't give out project files. Like they're yours. And one, I have found clients don't really like to be surprised by that at the end because at least here in the states, you're very often being hired as work for hire, and so basically you're just a part time or temporary employee for that company. So they really own the rights to whatever you make. Just hand them over, like that. That's it. If you're doing a project rate, uh, I used to have a clause that said like project files are an additional 50% or something of the project fee to hand it over. And I started thinking about it more and more that like nobody's really doing anything special anymore. Like we all learn from each other. We all are taking school motion courses and learning from YouTube and things like that. That like the argument that I created something that no one else has created before is like, hmm, did like yeah, like sure, maybe artwork wise you might have, but like, did you really like somebody can easily open your files and just look up a YouTube video and figure out what you did. And so do you want to be coming like having the clients come back to you asking you to make, 5 changes every 2 weeks for something that they could do internally and you could spend your time finding new clients or better paying work or things like that. So I'm of the mindset of just hand the project files over now and like just take that stressor off your plate. It's not worth it.
Hmm. I think that's super practical advice. For the sake of time, I want to get back to your story. So I believe things were starting to look up. You were talking about Discovery Channel.
Yeah.
Um, could you just continue from around there?
Yeah. So I guess to continue, 2016, I went freelance. Um, I want to preface this with freelance is awesome, but it's really difficult too. And I'm one of those people that tend to run at something before walking. So uh, Joey had just put out the Freelance U, which was a precursor to Freelance Manifesto. I had taken that. I had met a bunch of video editors and other motion designers at Discovery that were all contract based, and they're like, "Yeah, man, you got to go freelance. Like, we'll help you get into these studios, and it'll be great." It's like, okay. I didn't save any money. I had like 2 clients when I left. It's like, all right, I got these 2 clients, and they're booking me for a couple weeks. Like, I'm gonna make so much money, and after like 3 months, it just went dead. And it's kind of like it was exactly like how it seems every year. I've noticed that I left Discovery in January. I worked for a couple months, and then you get like this spring lull that happens, and I started freaking out. It's like, I'm not getting booked for anything.
When you have a family as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So family, mortgage, all that good stuff. And you know, I don't shun anyone that tries to go freelance and just doesn't work out. Like, it's super glorified on the internet and makes it seem like it's this amazing thing, and then it's really tough. You're running a business. So about 6 months after I went freelance, I started looking for full time work. I landed a gig at this studio. I lasted 3 weeks because it was awful hours. I was there from like 10 a.m. until like 3 a.m. most
Oh,
most nights.
yeah.
So it just burned me out. And luckily, luckily, one of my clients that I had worked with earlier in the year was like, "Hey, are you still freelancing? Like, can we get you on some work?" And that turned into, I want to say, like a 2 or 3 month long booking. That they then had some clients that needed freelancer, and so they recommended me to that, and it just started like snowballing. And I finally like got some traction going. And so like I like to call this like the 531 era of like basically from 2016 until recently, I was freelance, and it got really, really great. And it just takes time and like perseverance and like grit is what I like to use for that. So if you're thinking about going freelance, definitely like really weigh it and like talk to people and like read Joey's book. It's a great starter, but also like talk to people that have been doing it for a while and get their experience of like, what is year one like? What is year two like? And like, how much money are you going to make? Because I made, after like expenses of building a new computer and things like that, like maybe $20,000 my first year, which is
Mhm.
nothing for a family. Or like if you have student loans and stuff like that,
Yeah.
like $20,000 is really hard to live off of. Um, so
It sounds
yeah,
like things improved, but I do have one question about when you formed 531. What was the reasoning behind forming a studio with a name instead of just being Liam Clisham?
yeah.
Because I think that's
So
kind of a debate on the internet sometimes.
yeah, I think it's still debated, and I still debate it myself. um, so it's kind of a little bit of with how things were working when I went freelance, at least locally here in Maryland in the DC area, where I was finding studios weren't taking me seriously for bookings because I wasn't a formed entity.
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
especially in DC, where there's a lot of political campaigns, which I worked on quite a bit my first year. Um, they want that assurance that like you are a quality person and you've done your due diligence of forming a company and you have business insurance and stuff like that. So that's pretty much what pushed me to it. Is I felt like I was going to get a lot more work, and initially I did, and it really helped, especially locally when I was working with businesses. Um, but I would say by year 2 or 3, I haven't worked with a local company. Probably in the last 3 years or so.
Wow.
So it just kind of stopped mattering. Like they just wanted to hire me for me. So um, I don't know that it really matters.
Yeah, and now you said you're migrating some stuff back, which brings us kind of to the back to the 531 era and the
Yeah,
last couple of years. What's led us to this point where you ended up taking a full time position?
yeah. So the pandemic has been both financially really awesome. Like everyone that was doing video has turned to animation. If you know RevThink and Joel Pilger, they just had a call about like how they can't find anyone, and like all these studios are trying to find freelance motion designers and producers, and like basically everyone's booked.
Hmm.
And that was happening with me. So like a little bit on my side, I was not turning down work when I should, and was getting burnt out, which pushed me towards freelance. On the other side of it too, which I think might be why studios are having trouble finding people, is even though we're 2 years into this remote thing, communication for a lot of places I was working at was abysmal,
Hmm.
and not like in the sense of, oh, they're not paying on time and I can't get a hold of somebody, but like working on a project, messaging your art director on the team and not hearing back for like 2 days,
Oh
like
wow.
stuff like that. And then they're asking like, hey, why haven't you made any progress with this? Like, I've been trying to get your attention for 2 days,
Yeah.
and now you want me to stay up till like 1 in the morning to get this thing done. Um, which I generally push back on as much as I could, except for projects where like it was either a team that I really liked and the project was really fun. Then like, sure, I'll put in the extra hours. But um, that was really burning me out too. Is just like another project. This sounds great. I'm gonna make a lot of money. Oh, here we go again with like no communication, or oh, we're 2 days before delivery, and this happens all the time. But like we're gonna completely shift gears. How fast can we
Oh yeah.
change this? And it's like I know that's kind of common, but I felt like ever since the pandemic happened, it's been happening more and more where they feel like, oh, this person's remote and they live at home and they're working from home, so they can just jump in and put in those extra hours. Like,
Yeah, and there's something about this is just my assumption, but like or my conclusion. There's something about the distance where you don't necessarily have to like be face to face to give them this bad news that you can just kind of write the email and not have to be there when they receive it.
yeah,
That it's a little easier to see how far you can turn that turn that tolerance meter on the freelancer. But
yeah,
I don't know.
like it's kind of like what I guess kids are experiencing with like online bullying now, where like there's this veil
Yeah.
and people forget that there's an actual human on the other side. And when you send that email or producer sends that email, it does feel like they've kind of forgotten that aspect a little bit, the humanization of it.
So you ended up kind of burning out.
Yeah, I basically burnt out. I took off the the month of October and started to reevaluate things. My buddy Jeff had just started working at Recur. He kept talking it up, and I man, hopefully this doesn't put me in a bad light, but I kind of was over NFTs a little bit and just like Twitter again with all these links to everything. But the way the team talks about it and Jeff was talking about it and things like that, I was like, this sounds really interesting and like ways that I never pictured NFTs going and like being collectible experiences, like not just like a JPEG that you get, but like how can we capture these moments and turn them into things? I was like, okay. And then the team that they were building, I just one, I'm going to throw his name out there, Casey Hupke. He's my creative director. I've been following his work since I got into the field and like really looked up to him. And so it was an opportunity to join a team where that Casey was leading and learn again from people and like push my skills again. Where I felt like, okay, I was kind of plateauing creatively because I'm balancing client work and then I'm trying to manage look dev and then handing that off to maybe another artist. And so I was like, am I really even being creative anymore? So that was the other driving factor is like, I can join a team and be just a creative person again.
So could we shift gears and talk about some of your work? I know that
Yeah.
you pulled up something, um,
I guess,
and
so I pulled up my reel. I've pulled up, I thought it'd be really interesting to do like my first piece that I ever did in college versus where I'm at now.
yeah.
So whatever you want to do, you want me to share my reel? Do you want me to?
Could we start with your first piece?
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
Sweet. So I'll yeah. There we are. There we are.
yeah. Um, so some of it has sound, but it's terrible. So I'm just gonna like turn it down.
Okay.
But this is like my first project in college in 2012 or 2013, and we were given 4 or 5 words that you had to animate. Um, so you'll see them at the end of each sequence, but like the first one is like tweak or not tweak, twerk. Second one is like macho or something. Yeah. But anyway, they're horrible. And
Oh
basically
yeah.
like taking a simple line and making a butt shake for twerk. Let's oh yeah, this one is like scare or something. like very startled. That's what it is. Very simple shapes and line elements. Um, just to kind of get to know. Oh yeah, ignored. Caffeinated is this one just trying to learn text effectors
Yeah,
and
those
stuff like
effects are
that.
pretty nice.
And then this one's revealing, where you had to show how you can reveal something. So like, yeah, that was where I started, and then I pulled up my post pro profile, and so this is kind of where I'm at, and I guess this is like the most recent thing that I've posted, even though I've done a lot more work. Um, so this is all Houdini based particles and a little bit of C4D rendering in Redshift and going back and forth between Houdini and C4D. Um, so
It's like
quite,
I'd say you've improved a little bit, you know.
yeah,
Yeah.
quite the difference. But like, the whole point of me wanting to do this is like, if you are just taking After Effects Kickstart and getting started, it takes a long time and a lot of effort to get where this is now. So if you're feeling like imposter syndrome and stuff, it just keep putting in the work, and it'll get there.
So mentioning imposter syndrome, which I think is a common topic, um, how do you still feel imposter syndrome? Because I mean, I know a lot of people look up to you, myself included, and what you've done and are doing in your career. Um, but do you still get like those feelings of maybe they'll finally figure it out? I don't know what I'm doing.
Every day.
Okay. See, that's really encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that?
Um, I don't know. I'm a huge like stoic believer, and kind of just like taking things as they come, and like it is what it is. So like I'm I've really tried to have this mentality of like, "Ah, man, I really wish I was a better, I don't know, look dev artist like David Ariev or someone like that." But at the same time, like everyone's on their own path, and you never know what's going to pop up minute to minute, day to day, where like, okay, yeah, I planned on putting in this time towards this, and now my kid's coming home sick from school, so there goes that time for this. So I've really tried to stop being so hard on myself and just realize like it is what it is. I'm at where I'm at right now, and I'm going to make the progress where I can. But if I don't, then that's okay too. Also, just like the realization that what gets posted on the internet is like the best of these people. You're not
Yeah.
seeing the junk work that people are experimenting with and putting out. And um, like the first piece that I just showed, like that's like pretty cringeworthy now compared to what I'm doing. And
But I really
um,
appreciate you showing it because I definitely can relate to those first pieces that like their only purpose was to die at the hands of something better.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, totally. And you you just never know where stuff's going to lead. Like I've put effort into certain aspects and it went nowhere. But now when I go to a project and something comes up, it's like, oh yeah, I remember experimenting with something like this,
Mhm.
and I can apply it to that. So like every effort that you make in your career, it makes you better, even if it feels like you're not getting better. Like you're always going to be able to pull upon stuff that you've been working on. So also, yeah, reels, really quick. That's a weird sentence. I haven't updated my reel since 2018, and I still get hired for stuff. So something else I want to say is, yes, if you've got a lot of great new work, try and make a new reel, but don't feel the pressure that you need to make one every single year, because I see people like fretting about it every single year, like, oh, it's time to make a new reel.
So this, how do you feel about this 2018 reel when you look at the quality of this work?
I mean, there's some stuff in here that I still really like, but there's other stuff that I'm like, wow, I have come so far. And like a lot of these were personal projects that led to other things that I like. I ask myself, why did I get hired based off of this reel when I have so much more work, especially in the last 2 years I haven't had a chance to post? That's way, way better than this. Even like, I consider my Instagram kind of like a sketchbook.
Hmm.
And even in here, I'm like, man, I have little things on my Instagram that are way better than what I've got there. But maybe that's also part of why I get hired for stuff is I do show little snippets on Instagram and places and like what I've been working on and like they can kind of see where I've been developing. I'm not logged in, so
Oh, you got to log in.
basically don't get too hung up on reels. Like it's really important for your career, but at the same time, like don't pull your hair out trying to make one every year if you can't.
Most of your work is word of mouth at this point, would you say? Or I guess before you went full time?
Yeah. So before I went full time, first year was a lot of hustling and like trying to get to know people and like going to meetups and getting my name out there. And I would say that's really important, especially when motion design meetups start to open up again. And what was it? What was the second blend? 2017, I think. It's 2016. I don't remember. Whatever the second blend was, that year I went to Blend. I went to a conference in Dallas. I went to a couple conferences around Washington D.C. I went to Half Res. I went to like I want to say like 5 or 6 meetups in a year, and like just got my name out there. And after that, I started getting booked all the time. So it's really important to network, especially you never know where designers are going to go and who they know. So like going back and kind of making this full circle, also that selfish reason of why I wanted to have calls with people was like, who knows who I'm going to meet and where they're going to go. And like my goal was to hand off jobs, but maybe they'll come across a job that they can hand off to me. So yeah, networking is super important.
I'd like to end on the lowlights highlights section.
Yeah.
And the lowlights, I always preface this with like, it doesn't have to be some big tragic, harrowing event, but it could be if you want it to be, it could just be like a fun anecdotal lesson you learned the hard way or something like that. But can you think of a lowlight from your career so far that stands out?
Uh, yeah, I can think of like a low light highlight
Yeah,
combination.
yeah, great.
Yeah. And this kind of brings it full circle too about how we were talking about pricing in the beginning and our personal conversation is when I first went freelance, man, I want to say I was charging like 250 or 350 a day.
Yep.
And I was like, that's a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
And it feels like a lot of money. But I was at this gig and I love the gig and everything. The owner, Steve, came over to me. He's like, dude, you're great. Your rate is abysmal for the work that you do. And like that crushed me. I was like, oh, so I'm charging too little. He's like, yeah, like you got to bring it up like at least $100 or $200 based off of where you are now. I was like, really? Like that seems like too much. He's like, no, most of my freelancers are charging at least like 450 to 550 a day for just After Effects work. And I was like, okay. So like I eventually raised it up with my next client, and then about a year later, Steve hired me again. He's like, "So your rate is now like 500 a day." And I was like, "Oh, it's 450." He's like, "It's 500 a day, right?" And I was like, "Yes, it's 500 a day now." So um, that was like low point was, oh man, like I didn't realize how much I was kind of undercutting people a little bit with that rate and like undervaluing myself, and it really made me think about how you should value yourself as a motion designer. But the highlight was, at least very early on, I had a client that was like, you need to raise your rates. So yeah, kind of a nice balancing act there.
Well, Liam, I don't want to keep you too long. Thank you so much for coming. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the Square members? Any advice, or the floor is yours.
Um, I guess I had written a bunch of notes, but like doesn't really tie in so much anymore. Um, one, I'm an open book, so if anyone's watching this and they want to chat, hit me up. Even though I'm at a full time job now, I'm fully remote, so I can make time like this happen. Two, just go for it with stuff. Like that's the biggest thing I was telling people through my calls is if you want to work for big name places, just go for it. Like they're not going to seek you out. Like maybe like 1% of people get sought out because their work is so outstanding. But if you want to go work for Oddfellows, reach out to them. Like Chris, who's one of the founders of Oddfellows, super awesome guy. Like when we were doing Camp Mograph, he offered to like help us work through places in Portland and where to go. Like super approachable. Most people are really approachable. So like if you're feeling really stagnant and you're having that imposter syndrome of like how can I get better, you just gotta put yourself out there and do it. So I guess those would be my two things. Is one, if you ever want to chat, feel free to hit me up. Two, if you want to get somewhere in your career, go get it. Don't just sit there and be complacent.
Awesome. I feel like that is the perfect way to end this. So yeah, thanks again, Liam, for taking time.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you, Andrew.
yeah, I'm gonna hit stop recording.